Well, hey! Thanks for coming out to the farm on such an icy, rainy, just ugly day. It's kind of like the whole of the farm is in hibernation. What'd you bring from your world here? Let me see it. Oh, what good is this stuff? What is it? You call it trash? Well, I'll be. How did you come across it? How did you manage to find it? It's everywhere? Oh, well. I challenge you to find something that's waste in nature. You know, anything that goes unused is waste, right? Yeah, you might be thinking, hey, poopy is waste. Well, let's think about that a little bit closer. You know, you take a dried cow patty, you peek up under there, and you see these little earthworms are crawling around. You know what they're doing? They're eating it. It tastes great to them, I guess. Yeah, there's dung beetles, maybe one or two of those down there. So that is recycled into the soil. Good food for earthworms and buggies. So, you know all this talk about waste and trash? Did you ever hear of a little book by Bill Peet called The Wump World? Well, if you haven't, I think you're going to like this one. Let me read it. The Wump world was a small world, very much smaller than our world. There were no great oceans, lofty mountains, giant forests, or broad sandy deserts. The Wump world was mostly grassy meadows, clumps of leafy green trees, with a few winding rivers and lakes. But it was perfect for the Wumps, who were the only creatures living there. The Wumps were simple grass eaters and spent most of their time grazing on the tall, tender grass that grew in the meadows. In warm weather, they cooled themselves in the crystal clear lakes and rivers, and at night they slept under the shelter of the bumbershoot trees to keep the dew off their backs. Since the Wumps had no enemies, they wandered around just as they pleased, with nothing whatsoever to worry about. However, the Wumps would have worried if they knew that someone a million miles away was watching their little world. One morning, the Wumps were awakened by a far-off humming sound. It seemed to be coming from somewhere up above, and as the humming grew into a heavy roar, the sleepy-eyed Wumps crept through the trees for a peek at the sky. Zooming straight for Earth came a great flock of pot-bellied monsters with tails and fins and spitting fire and shooting out streaks of black smoke. As the monsters swooped down to land, huge legs sprang from bulging sides like gaping mouths. Doors flew open and ramps shot to the ground, and down the ramps came hordes of tiny creatures swarming out onto the meadow. These were the Pollutants from Planet Pollutus. They had left their worn-out old planet to start a new life in a new world. After such a long journey, the Pollutants were overjoyed to find themselves on solid ground once more. They were all prattling with excitement as they followed their leader, the topmost pollutant, the world chief, across the meadow. At the top of the hill, the chief stopped for a long look at the surrounding countryside. Finally he said, "Looks good, we'll take it. Plant the flag, Sergeant, and let's get things a-going." One shrill trumpet blast brought giant machines a-thundering off yawning spaceships, rolling down runways and out onto the meadow. The timid Wumps had been watching warily from the shelter of the trees, and at the sight of the giant machines, they were horrified. "Wump, wump," they cried in wide-eyed panic, and went humpity-clumping through the trees to go diving headlong into the nearest cave. Then they tumbled down head over heels through a twisting tunnel and ended up huddled together in dark caverns while earth-shaking machines rumbled and roared high above. Once they got started, the monstrous machines moved at a furious pace, gobbling up trees and grinding them to little bits. More machines flattened the ground, followed by great scoopers and scrapers and diggers and gigantic cranes. Soon the entire Wump World was overrun. The busy little pollutants kept up their mighty machines going full blast day and night without let up, in a frenzy to improve their wonderful new world. Suddenly great cities sprang up, huge factory buildings, towering smokestacks, high-rise apartment buildings, and tall office buildings. Above them all loomed the 100-story skyscrapers. Along with the building came a tangle of streets and freeways with on-ramps and off-ramps, overpasses and underpasses, jammed with trucks and buses and cars of all sizes, rushing pell-mell in every direction. It was one great turmoil of noise and confusion, and there was still more to come. Meanwhile, the poor Wumps remained underground, wandering aimlessly through the caverns, feeding on fuzzy green moss growing up on the ledges, and mushroom clusters in the crannies, and sipping the sweet water from pools fed by underground springs. But they were very unhappy. For all they knew, they might have to spend the rest of their days down there. The Wumps didn't dare venture to the surface, not even for a peek. They were much too frightened by the endless rumblings and roarings and loud screechings coming from above, and it was growing noisier by the day. There was more and more noise, more of everything, more buildings with more smokestacks puffing more and more smoke, with more freeways and more traffic shooting out more and more clouds of exhaust, with more trash and more trash piles, with more and more waste gushing into the rivers and lakes. Pretty soon, the cities were so clouded by factory smoke and the fumes from the freeways, the pollutants can barely breathe. They went a sneezing and a wheezing about the streets, grouching and a grumbling and blaming one another for the awful mess they were in. One day, an angry crowd gathered outside the World Tower building, demanding to see the world chief. When the chief appeared on his balcony, all the pollutants began shouting at once, "We can't breathe the air! We can't drink the water! We can't stand the noise! We've had enough!" "Ah, ka-choo!" sneezed the chief. "I know just how you feel, and something will be done at once. I promise you." With no time to lose, the chief called for a meeting with his 3 top outer spacemen. "Gentlemen," he said, "this world of Mars has gone sour. We've got to get out of here quick. But first, we must find a new world, a better world. That's your job, men, so get going." "Righto, Chief," barked the men. Within 15 minutes, they were at the spaceport, aboard the spaceships. Then karzoosh, karzoosh, karzoosh. The men took off in 3 directions, and in seconds, they were zooming about outer space at about 7,000 miles an hour. Days passed, with no word from the outer spacemen. After waiting a week, the world chief flew into a rage. "Blast it all," he bellowed. "What's keeping those blithering bubbleheads?" Then one Monday morning, from out of the dark, smudgy sky, swooshed one of the spaceships. As the spaceship touched down, the man hopped out, shouting, "I've done it! I've done it! I found a new world! A bigger, better world!" "Nice going, lad," cried the world chief, and the crowd gathered at the spaceport to give their hero one great rouse and cheer, which ended in a fit of sneezing. In no time, the great news was sent flashing around the world over radio and TV, warning all pollutants to be packed and ready to go within 24 hours. At dawn the next day, the entire population swarmed onto the space center and crowded aboard the giant spaceships. After double checking to make sure all pollutants were accounted for, the world chief gave the signal for blastoff. With a thunderous roar, the giant spaceship shot off the ground, zoom, and away through the smoke-blackened sky, and were gone. At long last, peace and quiet settled over Wump World. The sudden silence came as a shock to the Wumps. They could hardly believe their ears. Still, they wanted to take no chances, so they remained in their caverns with ears cocked for the slightest sound. After a long, long silence, they decided it was time to go, and led by the biggest Wump, they crept up the tunnel to the cave entrance to find it covered by a crust of cement. With one powerful push of his snout, the biggest Wump bumped his way up through. Then one by one, the Wumps waddled out onto the freeway and gaped with wide-eyed amazement. They had feared something awful had happened to their world, but this was much more than they could have imagined. They were staggered by the size of the huge buildings, with walls and walls of windows looming up on every side, and broad layers of hard, flat covering the earth, which felt strangely cold to their feet. There was no sign of any tree or tuft of grass. Even the sky was gone, and the Wumps wondered if there was anything left for them. At least they must find out. And they wandered the freeways for miles, only to find more and more buildings with endless heaps of wreckage and rubble. For all they could see, their world was completely ruined. Footsore and weary, the Wumps were about to give up, head back for their cave, when the biggest Wump let out a joyful whoop. Just ahead of them was a grassy meadow with a clump of bumbershoot trees, all that was left of their lovely world. Whomping for joy, the Wumps went bounding off the freeway into the meadow. Pretty soon the hungry Wumps were munching away on tall, tender grass. Now there was new hope for the Wumps. In time, the murky skies would clear up, the rains would wash the scum from the rivers and the lakes, the tall buildings would come tumbling down, the freeways would crumble away, and in time, the green growth would wind its way up through the rubble. But the Wump world will never be quite the same. Now Eddie, he wanted me to put a couple of pictures from Bill Peet in the video. All you got to do is pause the video and draw your favorite one. He says they're really good for drawing because they're lifelike, but they're a little simplified, almost like toward a cartoon. Yeah. Now, so anybody who's read this book, when I see a man trashing the world, I say, "Oh, that's a Wump world," and the people know what I mean. You brought me a video of people trashing your world. Let's take a look at it. We'll play it right now. Now, only man makes landfills and trash. You take stuff out of the cycle forever, it's there rotting away, not to be used ever again. Now that looks like a Wump world to me. Now, bigger and bigger things are becoming disposable in your world. We understand that you have disposable paper plates, plastic spoons, but increasingly our small part goes out on an appliance. It costs more to repair it than fix it, so you trash it. Even whole buildings like fairly new restaurants or hotels are being bulldozed and replaced by entirely new ones. Now that's waste on a grand scale. The problem almost seems to be that assembly lines and factories, the prefabricated houses, they make things so efficiently that to put time into something that's not mass-produced is to lose time and money in comparison. Now, this has everything to do with quantity. efficiency, not so much with quality. To make a lot of something quickly, you're doing that in your world, but how much quality is there really? You know, I think there's something about mending a much loved shirt or pair of pants. Keep it going a few more years. You know, that feels right to me. If a society is willing to throw off its possessions so quickly, you start to worry how long till it throws out its people like an old used styrofoam plate. You know, the respect we give to possessions in a small way relates to our value of people, because someone had to get a part of their life and their time to make that thing that you drive or you wear. So, be wary of the Wump World.